Blue Rage, Black Redemption. To poor people, prisoners, slaves, and the disenfranchised everywhere. Through faith and theories put into practice, you can bend the most oppressive circumstances to your will to make the impossible possible. Stanley Tookie Williams. Forward. It started out as a gray Friday morning, and as I rushed into a West Oakland McDonald's to grab a breakfast sandwich, I heard the commotion coming from a table of older black gentlemen in the back of the restaurant. If he killed those people, he ought to die, said one. Well, whether he did it or not, if he stays locked up for the rest of his life, that ain't living, said another. He might as well be dead. Although I tried to avoid this breakfast table debate, as soon as I was spotted, I was summoned to the table. Tavis Smiley, what are you doing here? One brother yelled out. We're talking about that gang leader, Tookie Williams, who was supposed to be executed for killing those people in LA back in the day. So Smiley asked another, what do you think? Should he die? The whole scene was surreal. I had just flown into Oakland International Airport that morning, and ironically, my radio producer and I were on our way to San Quentin to meet with Stanley Tookie Williams. He asked to meet me in person before doing an interview that would be aired on both my radio and television shows. It was November 25th, 2005, the day after Thanksgiving, and I was already riding a sea of emotions long before being confronted by the Breakfast Club. Of all the McDonald's we could have chosen. The truth is, at that moment, I wasn't sure how to respond to the brother's question. All I knew for sure is that I am vehemently opposed to the death penalty, and as a person of faith, I believe in the scripture where God says, vengeance is mine. So without going into too much more detail, that was my answer as I wished the brothers a good day. As I got back into the car, I started thinking about the morning ahead. Unfortunately, I visited friends or family members in jail over the years. Fortunately, I have never been to death row. I wasn't sure what to expect. But as for Stanley, I had a little bit of insight. When Jamie Foxx came on my television show, he talked about what it was like to portray Stanley in the television movie Redemption, the Stanley Tookie Williams story. Jamie also told me that in spite of Stanley's imposing figure, a massive chest, and bulging arms and legs from bodybuilding, Stanley was very gentle and soft-spoken. When we arrived at San Quentin a short while later, I found all of that to be true. After going through 2 metal detectors and security doors, we waited in a small visitor's room, a cell that had held only a table, a few chairs, and a small barred window that looked out into the bay. A few minutes later, a guard escorted the shackled, gentle, soft-spoken bodybuilder with glasses and gray hair to the cell. After his cuffs were unlocked, he reached out, shook my hand, and said, I'm Stan, and I've been waiting to meet you. As we sat down, Stan immediately opened the window, and we began to talk. We talked briefly about the childhood he discusses at length in his book. We talked about what it was like to be in prison for nearly 25 years, what an average day was like, and how he had coped for all that time. We talked about his children's books and his Nobel Peace Prize nomination. Then I asked some tough questions. I asked him about his life as a gang leader and how he felt about the death and destruction caused in the black community by gang violence in Los Angeles, where I live, as well as other parts of the country. I asked him about the murders for which he was convicted and how he felt about the victims' families. I also asked him about the fact that he reportedly refused to assist law enforcement with information in their efforts to arrest, prosecute, and convict other gang members. Stan solemnly and candidly answered all my questions. He told me that he was sorry for his gang involvement and for all the havoc he had personally wreaked in the community. He said that he was sorry for the losses suffered by the Owens and Yang families, but maintained that he was innocent of the murders. He told me that he believes God allowed him to go to prison to pay for some of the horrible things that he had done in his life, although ultimately he was being punished for crimes he did not commit. Regarding his cooperation with law enforcement, Stan gave me a somewhat more complicated explanation. He said that it was a violation of prison code for him to discuss certain gang-related matters because of broader implications that could lead to more violence for him and other prison members. Then we talked about the power of redemption. Stan told me that prison had afforded him the time to read and learn and grow. He shared how through prayer, reflection, and discipline, he had changed from a young, violent man filled with rage to a man whose life revealed redemption. Throughout our conversation, Stan held my gaze and his calm never wavered. And then we talked about his impending death. He told me that he had already told the prison that he had chosen to deny his last meal and, with the exception of Minister Louis Farrakhan, he would deny last rites or counsel with any clergy. I told him about the brothers at McDonald's and the questions that I had been asked. In particular, I wanted to know how he felt about fighting to spend the rest of his life, which could be another 25 plus years behind bars, death or life in prison. What does it feel like to face that inevitability? Stan smiled as he told me that his ability to influence young people to stay out of gangs was reason enough to want to live. He said that in spite of the soul-stripping regimens of prison, he had learned how to create and experience his own joie de vivre, a French term for joy of life. As our conversation ended, we stood, shook hands, and as I patted him on the back in a brief embrace, he reminded me to keep the faith. I realized that this could be the first and last time I would see him. It was. 3 weeks later, Stan was executed by lethal injection by the state of California. The night before he died, I couldn't sleep. I stayed awake past midnight, and after he was pronounced dead, I felt numb. Even after such a brief encounter, I felt a connection to another black man whose life, through bad circumstances and bad choices, like so many others, had ended way too soon. I also felt sorrow for all the mothers and fathers in communities that have lost loved ones to gang violence. After wrestling with those thoughts, I realized that Stan's legacy can be only one of tragedy and triumph. It is also a legacy that helped me grapple with the power of redemption. I believe that Stan reminded our society that we send people to prison to rehabilitate them. And we have to believe that process is real and possible for even some of the worst offenders. Ultimately, if we don't believe in redemption, we don't believe in America. For many reasons, meeting Stan was a life-changing experience that reminded me that but for the earnest prayers of my mother and the grace of God as a black man, I too could have been one of the 4 black men in prison on probation or on parole. I was blessed to have the personal encounter with Stan, but for all those who will never be able to witness his courage, conviction, and commitment to prevent young people from taking the same path he did, you can experience some of that pain and passion throughout this book, Black Rage, Black Redemption. I was blessed to have the personal encounter with Stan, but for all those who will never be able to witness his courage, conviction, and commitment to prevent young people from taking the same path he did, you can experience some of that pain and passion throughout this book, Blue Rage, Black Redemption. I sincerely hope that for many young men and women in Los Angeles and throughout the country, Stan's death will reaffirm the importance of life. Tavis Smiley, Los Angeles, 2007.